So welcome everyone. Today we have three different things. So we will start with a traditional lecture on design guidelines and patterns. Then we will have a break. Then we will discuss together very briefly, because you already know it, the text of the assignment 3. So if there are any questions or concerns about this, we can discuss. And then you will do an exercise on heuristic evaluation, okay? But let's start with the theoretical part. So today we will focus again on design guidelines and patterns. We already talked about theories and principles, right? So today we are focusing very briefly on guidelines, and then we'll move to design patterns. So differently from principles and theories, guidelines are more low level. So they are low level advice about good practices, and they fit in a specific context. So they typically are for a specific device, like for example mobile, but not only a device, maybe also a specific operating system. So we will see some examples by Google. So they fit in a specific context. And of course, also design guidelines can be seen as a shared language to promote consistency among different designers. So in a way, here you are going to implement some principles in a specific context. Okay, so principles can be in theory applied to different devices, different ecosystems. Here we specify these principles in a specific platform, in a specific design. So what are design guidelines? Are concrete suggestions about how the principles that are more abstract can be satisfied in a specific context. They are often expressed like rules, so they are rule-based, based on best practices. Of course, these guidelines encapsulate the experience of designers, and sometimes they are blessed as standards. For example, but we will see other examples, but from the accessibility guidelines, we know that every image on a website should have an alternative text, okay, for accessibility. That's specific for accessibility on the web. But be aware that guidelines can also be too specific and hard to apply to your situation, okay? Because it's very difficult to develop a general purpose guideline. Okay, so if you are looking for something general purpose, probably you should look for a principle. Some examples. This is a website. There is also the book version that describe how you should style things on the web. So these are the web style guidelines. It's about styling. It's not about the layout or other things. And it's for the web only, so really specific. So if you are developing a web application, this could be a good reference for the high fidelity prototype. We already mentioned this, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, okay? Maybe some of you already knows them. There is this set of guidelines that should related to accessibility that should be satisfied in all the websites. Okay, this is actually a standard by the W3C, and there is also a tool, for example, in Google Chrome that allows you to check to what extent a website is satisfying the accessibility guidelines. Okay, so just to show you an example. Don't know if this is a good idea, but let's check our own website. We should go on developer tools, I cannot see anything. Oof. Sorry. Okay. In the developer tools, there is this plugin, Lighthouse, that allows you to check a website against accessibility guidelines. So I click here on Analyze Page. The plugin is analyzing our website. And let's see the report for our own website in terms of accessibility again. So it's something very specific that in this case has nothing to do with the visual appearance and the aesthetic of the website. Okay, we can still improve, I think. Let's close this. Okay, let's. As you can see, there are some violations, like for example, here there is a violation about color contrast related to links, and then there are probably some heading elements that are not in a sequentially descending order. So there is a report with some violations, and there are also some screenshots from the website that tells you exactly where this violation occurs. And then, of course, there are other guidelines that are satisfied. So, for example, buttons have an accessible name. Okay, this is a very specific guideline that is satisfied by our own website. Okay, very specific. So let's go back to the slides. And let's look to other examples. Governments typically have some guidelines for their own applications or websites. These, for example, are the mobile user experience guidelines for creating government applications in the US. So if you are going to develop something for the US government, it's better to follow this kind of guidelines. Similar guidelines exist in the UK and in Italy as well. So these are the guidelines for developing an application, a website for the Italian government. And again, also companies have their own guidelines, and these are the guidelines by Apple. So if you are going to develop maybe a mobile application for the iOS ecosystem in your prototype, this could be a good starting point. This is from Microsoft, and this is material design by Google. Okay, so material design actually applies to the web, but also to Android application. You can have different guidelines depending on the target device, but still it's material design. So it describes exactly how to show elements in your pages, like for example using cards to display a list of elements and stuff like that. And finally, in addition to specific contexts like devices or operating systems, there are guidelines also for specific use cases. These, for example, are the guidelines for human-AI interaction proposed by Microsoft Research some years ago. You will do a lecture next week on human-AI interaction, but as long as you are developing something that involves AI, you should really try to follow these guidelines. Of course, some of them will apply to your project, some will not, but anyway, it's a good starting point. So these guidelines describes the interaction between the user and the system, and there are different guidelines depending on the interaction stage. So you have guidelines before the interaction, then you have guidelines that are useful during the interaction between the user and the AI system. You have guidelines when something goes wrong, and you have guidelines over time. So just to see you some examples, these are structured like cards, So you have the name of the guidelines and the description in the first card. For example, this one in blue is a guideline which is important before the interaction. And so the guideline is make clear how well the system can do what it can do. Okay, so help the user understand, for example, how often the AI system can make mistakes. Okay, this is very, very important. And for each card, there is also a real-world example to show you how to apply this guideline. So, for example, here it's an example from Apple Music. The recommender in Apple Music uses language such as "we think you will like," okay, to communicate uncertainty. Okay, it's not "this is your favorite song for sure." Okay, it communicates some uncertainty. Another example, in this case, when something goes wrong, a guideline is support efficient correction. This is something that we have already seen in our principles. So make it easy to edit, refine, or recover when the AI system is wrong. Again, there is an example, and in this case, it's the autocorrection in browsers. And so far, so forth. You can explore these guidelines freely on these websites. And finally, this is the last example, another specific use case. These are guidelines for augmented reality. So if you are planning to do something in augmented reality, please refer to these guidelines as a starting point for your prototypes. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so we can move to design patterns. And what about design patterns? We have seen that we can have theories, principles, guidelines. Theories and principles are more abstract. Guidelines are more specific, low level. What are, in your opinion, design patterns instead? What is a design pattern? A default way to do something? The menu bar on the left, nav bar on the top. Yes and no, almost. Any other ideas? So there is a specific thing about design patterns, that is, design patterns are clearly linked to a specific problem, and in particular to a specific design solution that may solve that problem. Okay, so there are two main things in a design pattern: a problem and a solution. If there is no problem, there is no solution, so there is no design pattern. So, of course, design is all about finding a solution. And design patterns are well-proven solutions that solve commonly recurring problems. So there is a problem, and in addition, it's a common problem. So it happens multiple times. And there is a solution for that problem that has been demonstrated in the past from other designers. That is a well solution, so why not reusing that solution? So they suggest a specific solution for the problem. The solution has been tested by others, and this solution can be reused. We, as designers, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, right? So the main advantage is reusing things. Because unfortunately, developers often tend to reinvent things, so that it's hard then to know how things were done before, why things were done in a certain way, and how to reuse a solution in particular. So if there is a problem, it's better to look for existing solution that can be potentially reused. And the context is important here. So design patterns were first used in architecture, and the idea was introduced by Christopher Alexander, who defined a design pattern in this way. So each pattern describes a problem that occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to that problem in such a way that you can use this solution 1,000,000 times over without ever doing it the same way twice. So yes, there is a solution, but then that solution could be potentially implemented in different ways. Okay? And this book is a collection of patterns for urban problems, and then the same concept has been applied to our own, so human-computer interaction and design in general. Design patterns are a way to communicate common design problems and related solutions. They are not too general and not too specific, as I said before, and they can be considered as a shared language. So they are standard reference points for designers, and they also allow for debate over alternatives. And the important thing is that they are also readable by non-experts, and we will see some examples. We can think about design patterns as a sort of literary form. What is a literary form? It's an agreement between the writer and the reader. So think about a letter. So a letter always starts with "dear name" and ends with some letter closing, "best regards," and then my signature, right? So it's a sort of agreement. We, as a reader, already know that there will be certain things in certain positions, right? And so we can think about design patterns as a new literary form. So these patterns define certain things to be in a certain place with a certain meaning. And how can we describe these patterns, and how are they described in the literature? This is again an example from the Alexander book, so it refers to architectural patterns, but we will see in a minute that the same description also applies to UI patterns. So here we have a name and some images. The name is in common language, because again it must be readable by non-experts, so it already conveys the idea of the solution and in a way of the problem. What is this pattern? Sitting wall. Okay, we can easily imagine that we are speaking about a wall on which we can sit. Okay, then there is the context. So it's important. Not all the design patterns are useful in all the context. Websites versus mobile. There is different screen size. So again, the context is important. It's not a principle that can be applied everywhere. Then there is the problem statement. Okay, and in this case, the problem is in many places, walls and fences between outdoor spaces are too high, but you still need something to divide spaces in some ways. Okay, so the problem. Then we have some examples of solution to that problem. And finally, the solution statement, which in this case is surround any natural outdoor area and make minor boundaries between outdoor areas with low walls about 16 inches high and wide enough to sit on, at least 12 inches wide. So it's quite specific. It also gives you the dimensions of the walls to be designed. Okay? And finally, there could be also references to other patterns to maybe show some links between different patterns that are connected together. So this, I think, clearly describes what is a design pattern, and we can clearly make a parallel with UI patterns, and we will do that in a minute. But before this link, let's add some more details on this. So design patterns are also useful to find trade-offs and in a way to balance forces. because design patterns solve a problem of conflicting forces typically. So, for example, we as humans are naturally drawn towards light, right? At the same time, when we enter a room, we would like to sit, okay? So there are these two conflicting forces. Maybe there is a window, we are naturally drawn toward that window, but at the same time, we would like to sit. And this is the solution, the Alexander window seat pattern. And it's an architectural pattern that is still used today. A window where you can sit, okay? So in a way, it's about finding a trade-off between the two conflicting forces. Of course, this again is about architectural patterns, but we can have conflicting forces related to user interfaces as well. And indeed, architectures describes physical environments in which people need to live in. HCI describes instead virtual environments that people need to interact with. So there is a clear parallel. And the concept of design patterns has gained interest in the HCI community as well. So there is actually a strong connection between architecture and user experience design. In our digital environments, every interface is unique, of course, but that doesn't mean we should constantly surprise the user. So no one wants to enter their phone number using an increment button, right? Or adjust the volume by rotating this lever. So design patterns bring familiarity and predictability, and that makes interfaces more usable and more enjoyable. On this website, you can find a comprehensive set of UI design patterns. So let's open it, if we can. Is the cursor? Oh, okay. Let's close this. Okay, and let's. You can have different categories. You have different categories of patterns. Here you have patterns for getting input. You have patterns for navigating the page. You have patterns for social networks. For example, if we look at, I don't know, pagination. Here you have the pagination pattern, and as you can see, the structure of the description is very similar to the one in the Alexander book. We have a problem summary. The user needs to view a subset of sorted data in a comprehensible form. Then there are some examples with some screenshots. There are some advice on how to use it, when to use it. So use when it's unsuitable to display all the data on a single page. Use when the data set is in some way ordered, and so on. And then there are more examples. And finally, there is the solution statement. So break a complete data set into smaller sequential parts and provide separate links to each, and so on. The motivation, and more examples, and so on and so forth. This is just an example. You can look at the website to discover, to see more details on different patterns. And I have actually included some examples in the slides. So this is a set of design patterns that are, I think, that can be used on different devices. And the first one is the accordion menu. You will find this also on the website. Here there is a screenshot. What is an accordion menu, in your opinion, and when is this pattern useful? So the accordion menu is this one. It's like the menu on Google Drive. You have top level items that can be expanded and collapsed. When is this pattern useful?
When you can show all data altogether.
When you can't show all the data all together, that's right.
Some kind of hierarchy.
And there is some kind of hierarchy. True. Drop-down menu. This is very common. In this case, there is only one element that you can click, and when you click it, there is a drop-down with other options. Of course, also in this case, there are pros and cons, and you should really think about when you should use it. So you should think about the data you need to display, because a drop-down menu with 1 million items is probably not a good solution. At the same time, a drop-down with 2 items is probably weird. Okay, so you really need to think about the data you need to display. Then another example, cards. This is a design pattern to show a list of elements on your application, on your UI. It's common, for example, in the material design by Google. So it's a way to group related information within a card, okay? And of course, a card can contain a title, an image, some descriptions, and also some action buttons. This is interesting, breadcrumbs menu. You probably encountered this multiple times during your daily interactions. So it's this kind of menu, of step-by-step menu. What are the advantages of this menu, in your opinion?
It shows the progress.
It shows the progress, yes. So in a way, it shows the history of your navigation. Then there is another important advantage.
It's telling me in advance what comes next.
It tells me what comes next. This is true. And there is one more. Yes?
Maybe you know that everything is going well.
You know that everything is going well, so in a way I know my progress. But the other important thing is that I can easily navigate in this kind of history. I can, with one click, I'm here, with one click, I can go to step 1, okay? Or step 2, okay? So I see the progress, I see the interaction history, and I can easily navigate in this history. And finally, the hamburger menu, which is very common. These 3 lines that when you click them, typically there is a navigation drop-down, the navigation drawer on mobile application on Android. So it's called hamburger because it seems like an hamburger, right? So the 2 pieces of bread with something in the middle. And it's very common for navigation. It's, I would say, a special case of a drop-down menu or something like this. Okay? Other examples, more specific in this case, again, the context is important, and here you can find a list of design patterns for mobile applications, and in particular for Android mobile apps. So the first one is the toolbar. This is a standard way to present titles and actions in your app. This kind of toolbars also have a standard height. And typically in a toolbar you have some navigation buttons on the left, like the arrow to go back if you are in a secondary page. Then you have some title, the title of the app or the title of the page. And then on the right you have the actions button. So for example, search, like, or 3 dots to open more possibilities. A special case of the toolbar is the app bar, which is the toolbar that appears in the home page. So it's the home page toolbar. And in this case, you don't have, for example, the back button, but you have again the hamburger menu to open the navigation drawer. Then you still have the title and some action buttons here. Then we have tabs that are used to organize and navigate to different sections within your app. So on Android, tabs always appear on the top of the screen with these dimensions, and you can switch between them by swiping horizontally. And they are generally included in the app bar, in the toolbar, right? So it's, in a way, merging two different patterns. Of course, also in this case, you should think about when to use tabs, because, for example, you cannot have 10, 15 tabs in your application, right? So if you have 3 tabs, probably you can use them to show the different pages and to use tabs as the navigation element of your application. If you have 15 different pages, maybe it's better to organize them hierarchically and use a navigation drawer, a navigation menu on the left. And indeed, the next example is the navigation drawer. So this is a panel that appears from the left of the screen when the user clicks on the hamburger button on the app bar, and it typically contains the top-level navigation options and also typically the account information. So you can also maybe log in or log out from the application. And finally, each device has its own patterns around scrolling and paging. They are typically very similar across different devices. So vertical scrolling is, of course, used to consume more content, and horizontal scrolling is typically used to switch between different pages. But there may be differences between ecosystems of different vendors. Okay? Any questions on patterns, on design patterns? Again, yes?
Like for Android phones, I see personally each maybe company has a different design. So maybe the back always is not in the left and some phones using different patterns.
Yes, of course, as your colleague said, the Android ecosystem is quite a mess because each vendor has its own design, its own specialized version of the Android operating system. So it may happen, it's common to find some inconsistency across the different Android versions on different vendors. Okay, that's for sure a problem because, again, consistency is one of the main principles we should follow. Okay? If you don't have any questions, let's move to the next chapter. It's still related to design patterns, so of course design patterns are here to support us in designing the best possible user interface for our users. Unfortunately, design patterns can also be used in the interest of the company, but not in the interest of the user. And here comes the concept of dark patterns. So it's something that we should try to avoid. So we must know this kind of design patterns in order to develop better interfaces. So dark patterns are deceptive designs that go against the user best interests. And the term was coined in 2010 by Harry Brignall, a design practitioner. And the aim of Brignall was to include all those designs that are deliberately adopted to promote choices that are, in a way, aligned with the company but not with the user needs, okay? Dark patterns was the original name. Nowadays you can also find alternative names like deceptive designs. As you may know, many organizations are moving away from oppressive terminology that we used in the past in computer science, for example, from master-slave to parent-child, and from blacklist to blocklist. In this case, the name dark pattern could be problematic because there is this association of dark with harm that may reinforce a sort of racist heuristic. So there are, again, nowadays alternative names for the same thing, like deceptive designs, manipulative patterns, and stuff like that. But anyway, researchers and practitioners have typically focused on dark patterns that lead to financial and privacy harms. For example, the original taxonomy of patterns proposed by Brignall include snake into basket, which is a pattern where an e-commerce website add an item in your basket even if you never selected it. So you are buying, for example, a smartphone, you are ready to pay, and your basket magically includes also a protective case. Okay? You never selected it, but if you don't pay attention and click to pay, you will also order that additional item. Another example, privacy zackering. So I think from the name you can easily understand who is the target here. So the target is the user, but who is the target of the name of the pattern? So this describes user interfaces that tricks users into sharing some personal, private information unintentionally. And we will see some examples. So there is also the Brignall website where you can have more details, more examples on this original taxonomy. But dark design patterns have gained interest in HCI as well. So here is a non-comprehensive list of papers that talks about this topic, but it's a field that is continuously evolving. And researchers proposed different taxonomies classifying all these different manipulative practices. And here is, for example, probably the most famous one by Gray et al. You can also read the paper if you want. Here the authors divided the dark patterns into 5 main categories. And the first one is nagging, which is a repeated intrusion of the system during normal interaction. So the current task is interrupted one or more times by another task, which is totally unrelated to the main task, and it's probably there just for capturing something from the user. And this is an example from Instagram, or at least an older version of Instagram. I don't know if it's still there. So an example of nagging behavior where there is this pop-up to turn on notifications on Instagram. And what's the problem here? First of all, it's interrupting the user multiple times, but then it's written in the caption, so I will not ask you this. But the problem is there is no opportunity to dismiss the message forever, right? There is only not now or okay. So you cannot disable this kind of pop-up, and this is clearly something that is not aligned with the user needs, right? Or another category, obstruction. This is a sort of barrier for the user, and it's exemplified on this example from iOS 6, so it's quite old, but hopefully as long as we discover this kind of patterns, we also have the opportunity to encourage companies to avoid this kind of patterns. So for example, here on an iPhone, there was this tracking for advertisements that you could enable or disable. But unfortunately, the option for disabling this kind of tracking was in a way hidden in a very difficult menu. So you should go on general, then about, then advertising, and then you can disable it. So why should an advertising option be classified, be organized under about? Okay, it's counterintuitive, right? So it's probably there just for creating a barrier for the user. Sneaking, again, we have seen the sneak into basket example. So it's an attempt to hide, disguise, or delay the information that has relevance to the user. So this is just an example from the paper. Here, to unsubscribe from a newsletter, you also need to accept a privacy statement that allows the website to sell the information of the user. Okay, this is no sense, right? I just want to unsubscribe from the newsletter, so it's really a dark pattern. Interface interference, it's quite similar to the previous one. It's a manipulation of the user interface that favors specific actions over others. Okay, so we have seen, for example, that it's important to distinguish elements. For example, the primary button, the primary action from the secondary action. That's true, but we should always keep into account the meaning and the action that are involved, right? Because when the actions are capturing attention, are capturing data, this is quite tricky. In this case, there is an example here. It's another e-commerce website. I can continue here, right? But the thing is, there is a checkbox which is not visible. Okay? If I don't click on more info, I don't see this checkbox. And additionally, this checkbox is selected by default. Okay? And this is clearly a problem. We are hiding some information to the user. And finally, forced action. So any situation in which users are required to perform a specific action to access or continue to access a specific functionality. And this was an example from Windows 10. I think that now you can avoid this situation. But anyway, when a system update was available, the user was unable to shut down or start their operating system without updating. Okay? Imagine you have to give a presentation or this lesson. Maybe you shut down the computer by mistake, and then you have to wait 1.5 hours for the update. Okay? This is clearly something that we should avoid. Yes?
But maybe it's not against the user best interest. Maybe it's a security update.
If it's a security update, that's true. It could be. It depends, of course, on the use case. This is just an example, of course. But again, we should always provide the user with the opportunity to personalize, to continue the interaction. Otherwise, there can be situations like this where I should really use the device, but I cannot, okay? So, as I said before, at least at the beginning, researchers and practitioners mainly focused on design patterns to capture data and patterns that lead to financial harms. Recently, there is now this interest on what we call attention capture damaging patterns, so design patterns that are there just to capture the attention of the user, just to keep the user on the platform. So most of the contemporary tech companies adopt this kind of business model that is called the attention economy. So we know that we can use most of our social media, for example, for free, but the reality is that our attention is transformed into a currency. So we pay for a service with the time we spend on it. And then tech companies may also sell our attention and our data sometimes to advertising companies. I don't know if you remember the Cambridge Analytica issue. And this business model is, of course, convenient, but we think that it's not well aligned with the user interest, right? So we define this concept of attention capture damaging patterns, which are recurring patterns in digital interfaces that a designer or a company uses to capture the attention of the user, exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of the user. And this, for sure, has some impacts on the user in terms of losing track of my goals, losing my sense of time and control, and typically users feel regret after, for example, overusing TikTok for 2 hours. So the goal of these patterns is to maximize continuous usage, daily visits, and interactions. And they create a sort of trap for the user that is aligned with the company goals, of course. So paradoxically, this kind of patterns can also improve the usability of a system, of a user interface, but are there exactly for that purpose. So to simplify your interaction in order that you can interact almost unconsciously. And there are a lot of psychological vulnerabilities and cognitive biases that this kind of patterns can exploit, like variable reward, immediate gratification, but we will see some examples. So what is a cognitive bias? How are these patterns working? So a cognitive bias is sort of systematic error in thinking in our brain that occurs when we are processing and interpreting information in the world. And these systematic errors, of course, affect the decision and judgments that we make. So just to make you an example, can you tell me the color of block A and block B? Of course, please do not go ahead with the slides. Black and white, yes. Maybe dark gray and light gray, right? Do you all agree? That's not true. The two blocks are actually the same color, okay? So this is called the Cheshire shadow. I don't know if I pronounced it well, illusion. So as long as we add some context, like the two lines here on the right, we can see that the two blocks are actually the same color. But even if we know this, if I remove the context, our brain is still not able to distinguish the fact that actually the two blocks are the same color, okay? So it's a cognitive bias. It's a systematic error of our brain. Of course, this is just an example, but this kind of patterns exploit stuff like this to capture our attention and keep us on the platform. So again, we can have different kinds of psychological vulnerabilities and cognitive bias that we can exploit. For example, the possibility of receiving new comments or likes keeps us in a persistent state of alert. So there is this concept of variable reward that we will see in some examples. We tend to compare ourselves with others, so we can exploit this social influence vulnerability, and so on. So let's briefly see before the break some examples of these patterns. First of all, a disclaimer. Some of these patterns are clearly deceptive, so we should really avoid them. Some other patterns, we call them gray patterns, because the problems depends on how they are used, okay? And the first example of gray patterns, we also call them seductive patterns. It's infinite scrolling, okay? For sure, we know that we have infinite scrolling on mobile apps, and this kind of interaction is fine in general. But what happens when this interaction is mixed with the recommender system, so with the AI that is proposing to you the next video, the next post? This can become problematic because as I scroll down the page, there is more content that is automatically loaded, but there is no end of chapter, right? So it decreases the effort required to browse content. So in a way, it's improving usability, but again, when mixed with the AI algorithm, this can become problematic. And also, the problem is that they are using this variable reward technique. So I cannot predict what will be the next post. Maybe it will be more interesting than the previous one. Maybe it will be less interesting, but there is this sort of uncertainty, and this is what keeps us scrolling mindlessly. Another example, we called it casino pull to refresh. It's the pattern through which I can easily swipe the page to receive new content, okay? So when I swipe down on my smartphone, there is this sort of animated reload on the page that may or may not reveal new content. And that's the hook, right? The variable reward technique. So maybe I'm scrolling on Instagram. I see that I have already seen this post. Let's go at the top of the page. Let's see if there are new posts to be. It's a sort of a slot machine, right? Or the never-ending autoplay, the fact that videos starts automatically when the previous one ends, like on YouTube, but also on Netflix and stuff like that. Again, the pattern per se may not be problematic, but when it's paired with the AI system, it can be. Then there are, again, guilty pleasure recommendations. Let's look at other examples. Yes, this is interesting. And it's actually a specific case of one of the patterns that was also included in the Brignall taxonomy. This is disguised ads and recommendations. So these are posts on social media that are recommendations or advertisements which are mixed, disguised with the normal content, right? So there is this post here that looks like a post from one account that I follow. Instead, if it's a platform recommendation. Or when you browse Instagram stories, there are stories from your friends, and then between these stories there are also advertisements, right? So that looks like normal content, but they are not. Or recapture notifications. So notifications that are there just to capture your attention, just to keep you opening the app, maybe complete one streak. Duolingo, for example, is sending tons of notifications per day. This could be also a problem, right? Because in some cases they are there just to capture your attention and to make you using the system more. Another interesting example, playing by appointment. So this pattern forces users to use a digital service at a specific time as defined by the service rather than the user. And an example is the Snapchat social streak, which count how many consecutive days two people have been sending snaps, whatever they are, to each other. So keeping this streak gives you extra points, but even a single day without sending a snap breaks the streak, right? So you are motivated in using the social media more and more. Or the Be Real notification, and I don't know if it's still in use, this social media, okay, more or less. Anyway, this social media sends you a notification and you have, I think, 10 minutes to post your current situation on the social media. So it's the system that is deciding for you. Okay, let's see a couple of examples more. This is another extension of a pattern that was already present in the Brignuss taxonomy. The attentional roach model. It describes a situation in which it's easy to get in, but it's very hard to get out. So it may be exploited to make account settings difficult to access. For example, I don't know if you ever tried to delete your Facebook account, if you have one, but it's a mess because here in the video you see you need to click multiple times on the menu to find the correct page of the settings, and then more interestingly, if you click on cancel account, you are not canceling anything because Facebook said to you, if you will open the website again in the next 30 days, we will restore all your account for you, okay? So if you by mistake or because you are in a way tempted to open Facebook again, they will recreate the account even if you decided to delete it. So if I want to delete my account, please delete it, and that's it. And finally, I would say fake social notifications, which are these notifications that violate the expectation that if I receive a message, it should be from a real person. Instead, these notifications are from a platform that pretends to be a real user, like this Diane Chang from LinkedIn, okay? Which is clearly a fake notification just to make you purchase the probably feature of the platform. Okay, so we have seen, we have explored the concept of guidelines and design patterns, and we have also seen that this kind of design patterns can also be used for the bad. So it's always a good idea to think about the design patterns that we are using and the potential impact that our user interfaces may have on the user. And so I think that this concludes the lectures related to the tools, the frameworks that you can use for design your prototypes. In the next slot, we will discuss again the assignment tree, and we will do an exercise on heuristic evaluation. Okay, so let's do a 15-minute break now, and then we will start with the new slot. Yes?